Thank you for joining us today. Keith Tebow from FRC Media. You know, we're trying to speak to as many candidates as possible leading up to the September 6th state primary to introduce you to the candidates who are on the ballot so you can make an informed decision on that day. Today, we're pleased to be joined by George McNeil, former Chief George McNeil of Somerset. He's running in the Democratic primary for Bristol County Sheriff. Chief, thank you for joining me. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Keith. Appreciate that.
Well, you know, first question I like to ask a lot of people is, you know, some people, obviously Somerset, Swansea may know of you, rest of Bristol County, maybe not so much. Tell us about George McNeil and why you're running for sheriff.
Well, 37 years in law enforcement. I started my career in Randolph PD, Randolph, Mass, Norfolk County. I spent nearly my entire career there, 28 years. I moved through the ranks there as a patrolman, detective, sergeant, lieutenant. I left there in 2014 as the commanding officer of the 4 to midnight shift, and I was also the accreditation manager. I got the department certified prior to leaving, and they're accredited now. But in 2014, I was appointed as chief in August of exactly 8 years ago. Yeah. I was appointed as chief. I was innovative, progressive. I think we're the most progressive in the county, if not southeastern Mass. I got technology out there. I was very forthcoming with transparency. I had a newsletter I published from 2015 to 2021, almost weekly. I did a weekly newsletter until probably the COVID hit, and then it was kind of less because we were involved with the COVID situation. So I was very transparent. But during my tenure as chief, I noticed our relationship as chiefs with the sheriff wasn't very good. And I started watching what he was doing, and I said, geez, he doesn't seem to be doing a very good job overseeing the department there. I knew some officers that worked there. I knew some counselors. I knew some clinicians, medical staff, and it was like horror stories constantly. But he was touting himself as being tough on crime. And I always said, well, how is he tough on crime? He doesn't have a law enforcement role, because sheriffs in the state don't have a law enforcement role. Right. Law enforcement roles go to sheriffs in states like California and Texas and Florida.
And many in the South as well.
Correct, that have unincorporated territories that city and local police don't cover, so the sheriff's department cover those areas. Massachusetts is too condensed, so the sheriffs don't perform that function here. So I always thought the tough on crime thing was, what does that mean? You try to scare prisoners straight? That doesn't work. It's proven it doesn't work. I was an adjunct professor for 11 years at Bridgewater State. I taught corrections. Scared straight doesn't work. You don't. So by treating people that are detained there poorly doesn't make them not reoffend. So having that that mantra was wrong. But that's what he talked about, was that. So I said, you know what? He's up in 2022, and I talked to Pat Haddad, my state rep. I said, hey Pat, what do you think about that? She goes, you should really give it some thought. Yeah, I think you have a good shot at it. And I thought about it. I'm not a politician. I don't even know how it works. I'm very honest, loyal. I have integrity. And you find out sometimes, I'm not talking about all politicians, but a lot of politicians don't have that. Yeah. And I don't want to run that sort of a negative campaign.
Yeah, so let me ask you, what's it been like? It's your first run for office,
yep.
Right? So what's this been like this fall?
Well, it started off trying to collect 1,000 certified signatures. Let me tell you that was tough, because I started in February. You know, it took a couple months, solid months of going out there to shopping centers and voting polls, and you know, and I did about 80% of it myself. I did have a couple helpers, but and I did notice the incumbents would have people that work for them doing it. But I did most of it myself. So I collected about 1,500 signatures. We get about 1,300 certified. That's a lot of work. So that was the start of it. And then, of course, you have to start with the campaigning, which we're into now. Fortunately, I have a good campaign staff that's very helpful.
Yeah. So, you know, before you have the opportunity to maybe face Sheriff Hodgson, you've got a primary first. That's why we're talking today. There are two other candidates, Attorney Nick Bernier and Attleboro Mayor Paul Heroux, running in the primary. How do you differentiate your experience to theirs, and why do you think Democrats should vote for you in September? Well,
yeah, I mean, you don't like to bash your other Democratic opponents because they're good people.
Sure.
And I've met them. I like them both. The mayor is very intelligent man, very well spoken. Nick the same. But the difference, well, at first, our platforms are very similar. I mean, it's semantics. It's, you know, he says, you know, the mayor talks about the 3 pinnacles of corrections. I say the same thing, I just don't call them pinnacles. I talk about rehab, I talk about education and programs and that sort of thing. And Nick's similar. What makes it different is I've had hands-on. I've been there, and I don't mean physically hands-on, I've experienced it. I was a police officer for a long time. I've arrested people, I've booked people, I've watched over them when they were in my jail. In Randolph we had 11 jail cells, so, and sometimes they were full, and I would have to monitor them. So, I actually started an addiction treatment program, an outreach program in Somerset, I think in 2016, that ran for a few years. That we, so I actually did it myself. And my cultural and institutional knowledge, I think, is better than theirs, because I understand police culture, I understand correction culture, because I've been in that culture since 1987. Well, 85 actually as part-timer, 87 full-time. So I've been in that field, physically, personally been in that field. So that's a lot different than the other two opponents.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times in a race like this, when you have an incumbent from the other party, and I'm sure part of our discussion will include this, you're talking about how you can make the department better based on your ultimate opponent, which would be Sheriff Hodgson, right? Mm-hmm. So I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things you'd like to do. Just looking at your website, actually, let me first ask you, you talked a little bit about what you've heard from some people who've either worked with the sheriff or had dealings with the sheriff. What has your relationship been with the sheriff when you were chief?
It was professional, cordial at best. Not a lot of conversations with him. I was president of Bristol County Chiefs for over 3 years. I was one of the founding members, along with Dan Racine, Kyle Hegney from Attleboro, and Chief Salwan from Mansfield. We kind of founded in 2015-16, right around there. I was a secretary at first, and I became president a couple of years later. And we tried to invite him to meetings because we had some things we wanted to discuss with him. And almost all the time, he sent a representative. He was too busy to come, or whatever. He had a reason he didn't come there. I found that odd because I know, I was friends with Mike Bellotti in Norfolk County for years. He was sheriff there for a long time. He's the same age as me, until he became mayor and moved on from there. And Sheriff McDonald in Plymouth County, there were sheriffs that always networked with their chiefs. They even went to the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs. I've been to IACP several times and all over the country when I was chief, and I would see those sheriffs there, and they would be there with the chiefs. And I never saw that with Sheriff Hodgson. And if I become sheriff, I am definitely going to make sure that I network with my chiefs to see what they need from me and what they can do for me. So it's it's quid pro quo. What can I do for you? What can you do for me?
Yeah. So let me ask you, in terms of issues, how would you bridge that relationship with chiefs? Do you have any ideas specifically in mind that how you would work closely with the local chiefs?
Sure. Well, part of the networking would be, obviously, if they don't have outreach programs. Now, obviously, the cities like Fall River and New Bedford do, Taunton as well, and in Attleboro. But you get into the smaller communities, they may not have outreach programs, or people are afraid to come forward because of the stigma that is related to going to some sort of an outreach program. I think that's a start. But Plymouth County has what's called a BCI, a Bureau of Criminal Investigation unit, where they do forensics, and they help out other departments in Plymouth County, small departments that don't have detectives and can't do investigations. They actually have an investigative unit in the Plymouth County Plymouth County House of Correction, and the sheriff there. And I would like to establish something here. They did try it here a few years ago. It didn't work. But I want to actually create space for that, and so we can do forensics for departments in this county. And that also allows your COs and your deputies to do other things other than just watch detainees or do vocational programs. It allows them to get involved with other communities and reach out. I'll give you, for instance, Taunton and Chief Walsh in Taunton. He was obviously part of Bristol County Chiefs Association. He would say at association meetings that he wouldn't even call the sheriff really for anything. He'd call Plymouth County to have their forensics unit come in and help him with investigations, take fingerprints, photographs, that sort of thing. So he's actually calling out of the county to get assistance from another county sheriff, which I thought is kind of embarrassing for the sheriff in your own county. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be able to rely on that sheriff in that county. Those are a couple things I do, but there's obviously other programs you can start and get the deputies involved, but also have the police officers come down with us and train together. So it could also be a big training component there.
One of your platforms on your website, you talk about recidivism in the jail. You're accusing the current sheriff of not doing a good job because inmates tend to come back.
Right.
What plans would you have to help
Well,
help transition those detainees back into the normal?
So they should be leaving there improved, not wanting to recommit a crime, and they're not leaving there in that way. And I listen. I respect the fact that there are career criminals. I think part of my master's thesis was nature nurture. So way back when, many years ago, when I got my master's degree, obviously there's people that the nature component. There's people that are just bad people, but a lot of those are not in your local jails or your county jails. They're in state prison. Most of the people that are in your local jails, unless they're being held on bail for a serious crime, they're there for, they had a suspended license 10 times. It's a third drunk driving. It could be a burglary, but it's something usually associated with addiction or mental health issues or the fact that they can't get a job or they don't have a vocation. So those things right there, addiction counseling, mental health counseling, and vocational training, those have to be platforms for a sheriff. You have to rely on that. That's how you're going to lower crime. It's not by telling your constituents, I'm tough on crime. You can't be tough on crime. You don't have a law enforcement role. And even as a police chief, I'm not going to go out there and say I'm tough on crime. That's thrown right out the window. Be smart on crime. Be safer, have better management, be accountable, rehabilitate, and get your trust back, SMART. So those things are important. You have to have those things in place. You have to have good management, you have to be accountable, and you have to do better programs and make sure those programs work. And another reason why I ran as well is one of my campaign staff is a counselor, addiction counselor, does addiction treatment. And he just shakes his head. He goes, the sheriff doesn't do enough. He doesn't do enough. We lose people all the time. There's no follow-up. The mental health the same way. That is so important. So how are you going to reduce recidivism or reoffending? How are you going to reduce that? It's not by treating them like garbage when they're there. Because he has some of his constituents believing that if he treats them poorly while they're there, so they're not going to come back there. That's so wrong. Read a textbook. Read multiple textbooks. It'll tell you. It's like Scared Straight. Remember that show back, the first one that came out in the late 70s? And where were they, in Rahway? That's not, those people, most of them went into the criminal field anyways. They became criminals. Scared Straight doesn't work. So you're scaring those people into believing, well, they're not going to want to come back here. Well, that's wrong, because they got coming back there. And they continue to. So how are you going to do that? You're going to rehabilitate, you're going to train them, you're going to teach them how to read and write, you're going to give them a place to stay, you're going to let them make a phone call. All those things. It's not being soft on crime, it's being smart.
What about relationships with correctional officers?
Well, I've developed relationships with the ones that are currently there, and I think I told you today, I was at a gym today, at one of my gyms I go to today, not in this county, it was in Plymouth County, and the woman behind the counter happened to know I was running for Bristol Sheriff. She goes, I used to work there, terrible place to work, can't stand the sheriff. Didn't solicit that information at all, she just said that to me. She goes, maybe if you become sheriff chief, I'll go back and work there again. And I've heard that from people that don't work there anymore. I go to the gym in Fall River as well, and there's a lot of retired people there that come forward to me. They said it's just awful. It's a terrible place to work. Current officers, I met with one the other day. He reached out. He said, "Hey, Chief, can we talk?" I said, "Yep." And we chatted. And I just shake my head. The staffing levels are extremely low. It's unsafe for the COs, and it's unsafe for the people that are staying there. It's just an unsafe environment. So for the sheriff to go out there and portray this as everything's great and hunky-dory, that's false. It's a false narrative. Yeah. I think it's more about promoting himself and just wanting to stay in a political position for more than 25 years.
What about the number of facilities? I mean, I've worked in this Bristol County doing media for nearly 30 years. Started in New Bedford. I remember covering a story at the Ash Street Jail where there was a revolt going on, sort of a mini riot that has gone on there. Is there opportunities, if you're a chief, sheriff rather, to do something about the number of institutions? Is Ash Street Jail maybe no longer needed in terms of his age and everything else that goes along with that old facility? So yeah,
that's an issue that has been brought up a few times, and I've asked actually some of the COs like working in Ash Street better than Dartmouth. Yeah. But Ash Street's old. Yeah. It's kept up, but it's old. It's right on a main road, Ash Street. There's 260 people in there, and the reason why I know that is the address is 266 Ash Street. That's their address. But there's only 700 in Dartmouth, and Dartmouth can hold 1,200 people. The question is, why do we have them there, and just why don't we put them all in Dartmouth? Improve the facility, make it a better place for everybody, not just the detainees, but for the COs. Tear down Ash Street, make a medical facility out of it, a training center. You could repurpose that place by just taking it down, build a state-of-the-art medical receiving platform for people to come to that are going to be incarcerated, whether it's temporarily or for a period of time, and have them checked there, because police departments run into that issue all the time. There's no medical staff to take care of someone that might have a medical issue. So Worcester did this. The Worcester Sheriff's Department did this. They have a medical facility up there for people that are being detained. You can do that with it. You can make a training facility to train the officers. You could also train the detainees on vocation. But take that place down, repurpose it, and do something else with it.
Sheriff Hodgson was criticized quite often for his relationship with ICE and the detainees he had in Dartmouth. That program went away. Is there possibilities there to use some of the facilities in Dartmouth too, to repurpose them to help? And could that have been the issue with the 1,200 number not being?
Well, I know the ICE facility was not being used. It was just there. Okay. I've heard that he wants to make that into some sort of a training facility. He's also doing some building across the street. I'm not quite sure what that's going to be yet. But yeah, I mean, you could actually just make that extension of the jail and make it maybe something for people that need to be segregated due to mental health issues. You could always repurpose that and make that something different. The ICE thing we shouldn't have been involved in anyways, because we should be taking care of the people in Bristol County, not the federal government. That's not our job.
Yeah. Now, in terms of moving forward, you know, we talked about recidivism and the physical facilities. I know on your website you talk a lot about transparency. You mentioned it here, regular communication when you were chief in Somerset. Is that something that you want to bring back as sheriff? And is that a way to build a bridge, maybe bridges that may have been burned by the current sheriff? Yeah,
so it's not going to be about self-promotion. It's going to be about, what are we doing? What are we doing here at the facility or facilities? What are we doing to improve the overall climate here, to make it a better place for people to work, that want to come there and work for Sheriff McNeil, not for Hodgson? What are we doing? And you can do that transparency through a newsletter. And I think I had mentioned this in a couple other venues that I've spoken in, that I did a newsletter from 2015 to 2021, almost weekly. The first 5 years it was weekly until COVID hit. Where I informed the public about upcoming events in the community, what the police department was doing currently as far as grants were concerned, as far as any specialized units we were starting, or something positive. And then I talk about what happened the previous week in the police log. And I wouldn't talk about everything. I talk about, you know, it might be a bad accident, it might be a drug arrest, it might be a gun arrest, it might be something like that. And people loved it. We had great contact with people. We did it through nextdoor.com, which is a local, hyper-local platform that I used, and we hit over 30% of the households in the community. I like to do the same thing, probably through Nextdoor as a sheriff, and do maybe not a weekly, maybe a monthly newsletter to talk about numbers, statistics, what we're doing in the sheriff's department.
Is that a big issue that maybe people really don't know what's going on, whether it's because of, you know, the current sheriff's, you know, attitude and, you know, his approach that need to be improved upon?
Yeah, so I talked about that SMART, S-M-A-R-T.
Yeah.
Accountability is one, but right. Trust is another. And you know, trust and transparency are very similar. I think there's a lot of loss of public trust, and that's what you know, some of the derogatory words some people use when they talk, when I ask about, or when I tell them I'm running and they say something about the sheriff, it's usually not said in good terms. Usually they're upset about him. They don't think he should be there anymore. And that's not me saying it. That's people saying that to me. I went to the feast in New Bedford, and I met a lot of people there, and a lot of people were not happy with him, the people I spoke to. But that's not just there. It's everywhere I go. And I talk about being the sheriff, and they just, you know, there's a lack of trust with him. Maybe it's his you know, when Trump was president, seemed like he was more times in Washington, D.C. than he was here. He was talking about helping build a wall. He was talking about things that are just like, what are we talking about here? Yeah. You're a sheriff in Bristol County, Massachusetts. You're not a national figure, and you shouldn't be. And I don't want to be a national figure. I just want to run an efficient, a well-trained, trustworthy sheriff's department. I don't want to be a national figure that's on Fox News and that is on, you know, doing these podcasts everywhere, promoting himself. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Are there any other things you see with the operation of the office that you could possibly simplify or make a little more streamlined?
So I think that's another one of my platform points, is that there has to be reorganization. When I became chief in Somerset, I reorganized and make it a little more streamlined. There definitely needs to be some streamlining done to the sheriff's office in Bristol County. You can even go to Open Checkbook, the Mass Comptroller website, and look at, anybody watching this can look it up themselves and see what people are making there and see how many people, as administrative staff, and what they're making for money and have take-home cars. That has to change. It has to be streamlining. The corrections office should be making more money. There's no doubt about that. The second lowest paid in the state. They're being forced. We talked about this off air. Yeah. The second lowest paid in the state to Dukes County, and I think Nantucket, because Nantucket's part-time. But the second lowest paid in the state, they're being forced to work multiple hours. I mean, I'm talking 20, 30 or more hours a week in overtime. So they're not at time with their family. It's an unsafe environment for them. And I mean, do they like making the money? Sure, but their base pay is terrible compared to other. They can go to Essex County, they can go to the North Shore and make $30,000 more a year. So that's why you get people leaving. They say, we can go to Plymouth County, it's right next door. We'll go there. It's a better working condition, better working environment, and the morale's terrible here. We'll go there. So why wouldn't you? Or why wouldn't you take a bridge academy and become fully trained instead of the Reserve Intermittent Academy or the Sheriff's Academy? Why wouldn't you want to become fully trained in the municipal police officer and then just go become a cop? So these are things we have to overcome. That's going to be difficult to do. You have to make people believe that you're going to have a sheriff's department that's professional and people want to work there because you provide a good work environment for them, which there isn't one now.
Yeah. Last couple of minutes left. I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you want to speak to the people of Fall River and Bristol County and why they should vote for George McNeil in the Democratic primary on September 6th. Yeah,
so I appreciate you having me here, Keith. So I am running for sheriff. As I said to Keith earlier, I have the most institutional and cultural knowledge of all the candidates involved, the other two, and I believe that I can make the place better. I can make the Sheriff's Department a better place to work. People want to work there. People want to be recruited by us. But at the same time, I think there's all sorts of opportunity to rehabilitate, give these people vocations, teach them vocations, get them away from addiction, maintain counseling for them, and treat their mental illness. These things that need to be done, and that's going to lower the crime rate. I know it will, but it has to be consistent. And we will do that. We will consistently pursue that endeavor if I become sheriff. And at the same time, we will work on increasing the pay for our officers that work there and making it a safer environment. I hope I can get your vote on September 6th. Please come out to the primary and vote for me, George McNeil, at the Democratic primary on September 6th. And hopefully after that, we can go head to head with Hodgson. Thank you.
Right. Chief McNeil, I appreciate your time. And as I tell everyone, when you win in September, we'll bring you back. We'll do another more in-depth interview when it's going to be like one-on-one with you and Sheriff Hodgson. So I appreciate your time and all the best.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Keith.
And thank you for joining us on FRC Media. And please make a point to vote on primary day, September 6th.